Africa Middle East, represented today by Dr. Samira Amelo and her team, also CropLife South Africa and my team. A very warm welcome to you all to the session today. We're very pleased to have our colleagues from CropLife Africa Middle East with us, and between Margot and Samira, they're going to lead us through some sessions today. So I'm just welcoming you all and getting you to be quiet so that we can welcome Samira onto the stage to address you all. Samira?
So then, bonjour. Good morning. So I'm Dr. Samira Amlal, and I'm the Director General of CropLife Africa Middle East. So CropLife Africa Middle East is the regional association representing the R&D company, manufacturing and distributing the crop protection, seeds, and biotechnology in Africa Middle East. We are also representing 22 national associations from Jordan to Morocco, where I am based, to South Africa, where we are very pleased to be here today. So thank you very much for joining this important forum. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to exchange with you all around how we can work together towards sustainable agriculture in our region, Africa. So you are all aware that agriculture in Africa faces many challenges, including climate crisis, disease and pest pressure, inflation of rights, but on the top of that is access of markets. And also, as you know, Europe is our biggest partners for all Africa. And we are here to discuss and to understand what's ongoing in Europe around the Green Deal and particularly the farm-to-fork strategy. We, as an industry and private sector, we have been looking in deeper on this strategy, and in some of the biggest markets in Africa, South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, we are working with research on this impact to assess what can be the impact of the Green Deal when it comes to trade and the trade standard. So I'm very excited to have this discussion today, and that can help us to build together, private, public researcher, a strategy that can award to have an Africa Green transition for our region that really replies to our needs and the challenges and can help our growers to continue to access to trade when it comes to Europe. Thank you very much in advance, and again, I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking to continue the discussion this morning. Thank you very much, Rod.
Thank you, Samira. So a lot of you in this room are CropLife South Africa members, so I think you know who we are, but we do have guests here today who might not know about CropLife South Africa. Samira's told you how CropLife Africa Middle East looks, but what about CropLife South Africa? So we are a not-for-profit industry association, and our members in South Africa are made up of suppliers, generally the registration holders for agricultural remedies. We also have distribution members. These are the companies and the crop advisors who are selling the ag remedies to the end user, i.e. the farmer. And we also have associate members. Excuse me. Associate members in South Africa are companies such as laboratories that do residue testing, or companies that are doing field trials on behalf of our members, as an example. We are currently sitting on roughly 167 member companies within the CropLife South Africa Association, and we also get asked from time to time, why does CropLife think it speaks on behalf of the agricultural remedy industry? We believe we have the mandate to do that because when we look on AgriIntel, our database of registered products in the country, 90% of the registrations on AgriIntel are held by CropLife South Africa members. So we do believe we have a legitimate mandate to talk on behalf of the industry. The other thing that is really interesting is our continuous professional development program. We are now sitting close on 1,300 people from our industry members that are participating in our CPD program, and new legislation in the country, such as the Extended Producer Responsibility Laws, which is the circular economy for packaging. We're very pleased to say that all of the CropLife South Africa members are part of the CropLife South Africa PRO. So, round about this time last year, we had a restructuring of CropLife South Africa, and we came up with some new focus for the industry association. And one of the new foundation pillars of the association is compliance. So already since this time last year, we've been working with our executive council and all of our members. Those of you who were at our CropCon roadshows this year, we had them around different parts of the country, you will know that we are pushing compliance as a really key factor for our association. In fact, it has now become a condition of membership. So it is expected that all CropLife South Africa member companies comply with all relevant legislation impacting our industry. And I think you will join me in understanding, if you think about the current terrible situation with the poisoning of children as a result of contamination from street poisons, you know that compliance with all these laws is not just a right thing to do, it's absolutely essential for us to have a sustainable industry going forward that is relevant to wider society. So why are we all here today? You will all remember that a couple of years back we had a rather big seminar down in the Western Cape to introduce the EU Green Deal not only to our members but also grower associations and partners. And at the time we explained to everyone the EU Green Deal is a huge project where the European Union aims to be carbon neutral in the very near future. And under the EU Green Deal itself, there are a number of subcategories, and the one that was specific to us at that time was the farm-to-fork strategy. And you remember we highlighted some of the factors in the farm-to-fork strategy that could potentially be negative to South African agriculture. Just to name a few there that we were looking at, the one was the mirror clause, which in a nutshell says that any conditions or restrictions on a European farmer should also be applied to farmers in non-EU countries who are sending produce into the European Union. That caused a little bit of concern for our industry. And also the other one, especially for our export market, was the plan to revoke MRLs or import tolerances where the active ingredient is no longer used or registered for use in the European Union. Now, potentially that could cause issues for our members and our farmers in South Africa. So, as the industry, from Morocco all the way down to Cape Town, we have been engaging with our members and other countries. And Samira mentioned something to you, I don't know if you picked up on the term she used, but it's something that CropLife Africa Middle East is trying to get out there, and that is the Africa localized green transition. There is no way that any of us are going to be so arrogant as to tell the European Union what they must do. Absolutely not. However, what we would rather like to do is to work with the EU on a green transition for our continent that makes sense for our farmers, for our people, and our economies. So working with the European Union on a mutually acceptable solution to this is certainly a priority. So apart from working at our local levels, for example, we engage with our Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. Our colleagues based in Brussels have been engaging quite a lot there to try and convey the African message. And the message is our growing conditions on the African continent are not exactly the same as Europe. We have different climate, we have different soils, we have different topographies, we have different ecozones. You don't see many tropical or subtropical fruits grown in Germany or further north in Europe. And we are therefore trying to just show that automatically taking rules and regulations for Europe and imposing them on Africa are not always going to work because of the differences that we have here. So in an attempt to get these concerns addressed at the European level, our colleagues in Brussels have met with a group of ambassadors that are representing African countries, and they have been very successful. In fact, Samir has told us that the South African ambassador has been quite a good ringleader in gathering together all the ambassadors from Africa with the same vision, is to raise the point in Brussels. We want to work with the European Union. We all want a green transition in our own lives and in our own countries, but we really want it in a custom-made fashion that works for our continent. So, in addition to this, I think all of you will be the same, whether it's in your business or at home. There's nothing worse than someone coming up to you and waving a finger and saying, "You're wrong, you're doing something that I don't like," and then walking away. So we don't want to be the voice that just complains to the European Union to say your stuff is not suitable for us. We want to come up with some solutions and some proposals as well. And also we can't just say you are going to be detrimental to our farmers. We need to come up with some data. And that is where Samira and her team and Alriza here in South Africa, they've been engaging with various researchers around the continent to actually gather said data. What is going to happen to on-farm employment in South Africa if we lose X number of plant protection solutions because we can't have produce going to Europe if it is used on that crop? What is going to happen to the farmers? Are they going to be able to produce? Will there be some pests that they can no longer control if the tools have been taken out of their toolbox? So that is what you're going to hear today. You're going to get the feedback. In South Africa, the body or the research-based company that was chosen to do the work is the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy. We all know them as BFAP, and you all know that BFAP once a year puts out their baseline statistics for agriculture in South Africa, which is just a most wonderful piece of work. So it really made total sense that BFAP would be the one to help CropLife do the investigation into the possible impacts of the EU Farm to Fork on South African agriculture. Now, please, today is not just a bunch of people standing up here lecturing to you and telling you some things. We also don't want to scare anybody and think that agriculture is in the toilet. Absolutely not. We want this to be a two-way street. So we want to open the conversation. You probably saw that in the announcement that went out. We want people to start talking about this. Is it all bad? Maybe the EU Green Deal and the Farm to Fork is going to push certain African countries, us included, to do the right thing. Maybe it's time to get rid of some old technologies. But at the same time, we need to have steps in place where we can bring the new technologies to our farmers. So it's really not all doom and gloom. It's about a debate. What parts of the European strategy make sense for Africa? What parts of a strategy can be homegrown that is also acceptable and makes sense for our partners in the EU? So no one is bashing anybody or anybody today. As I say, we want to start the conversation. So don't be shy. Stick up your hands. Argue. Disagree with what we're saying. But it's not going to end today. This is a start of a conversation that's going to take us forward. Samira also mentioned, let's not get hung up just on the EU Green Deal. I think you all know we've got lots of other trade issues out there. Day to day, we have South African farmers who have secondary regulators. The so-called secondary regulators are often supermarket chains in our exporting countries. And these supermarkets often have more stringent requirements or restrictions on the use of plant protection solutions than the European Union MRL or import tolerance, for example. Any of you who've been involved with export of fresh produce, you know exactly about these secondary regulators. Recently, we've had our neighbours, Botswana and Namibia, not wanting to take South African veggies. So there are lots of trade barriers that our farmers are bumping into. And if Mr. Trump brings forward what he's been promising to do in terms of trade and tariffs, will we even have a GOA or anything else in place come 2025? We don't know. But the point is there are always going to be challenges for our trade. You read the BFAP studies, you listen to things that Wandile puts out via Agbiz, you will know that export of agricultural produce is a significant chunk of our GDP. So we need to keep our eyes open for all of these challenges that we're going to be facing for the export of our crops. So I'm going to hand back now, or hand over to Margot to introduce the rest of the day, but I just wanted to thank you all. Remember, this is the start of a conversation on how are we going to ensure that South Africa remains relevant and that we can continue to trade with all of the trade barriers that continually come our way. And we're here to work with everybody. We're not the experts. We're not leading the drive. We just want to prompt you all to start the conversation. So thank you again for joining us today. And please don't be shy to comment as we go along. Margot?
Thank you, Rod. So good morning, everyone. My name is Margot. I'm in charge of Public Affairs and Communications at CropLife Africa Middle East. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I would like to call on the stage our next speaker, who will be setting the scene. And it's John Winter, sorry for the pronunciation, agricultural economist and director and Source BI.
Good morning, ladies and gents. Thanks for the opportunity. Brilliant and team, thanks for inviting me to today. All right, so my job for today is to set the scene. So I'm going to be speaking about the macro and microeconomic trends, specifically in South African agriculture. Okay, let's get this going. And just to start off with, the one thing that I learned while at university is how to plagiarize without getting caught. That was pretty much my job description at varsity. So just to start this presentation off, I just want to say thank you to BFAP and specifically Candace Klute, who pretty much gave me the first 6 or 7 slides of today's presentation. So I'm going to, off the bat, say this is not my information, but I'm presenting it to you today. So thank you, Candace and BFAP. Right, so let's kickstart today's discussion just with a kind of a big picture. And to start off with, we can see that livestock is one of the biggest subsectors within the South African agriculture. So in terms of average gross production value, the South African agricultural sector does about, over the 2021 and 2023 seasons, an average about 400 billion rand a year. So it's a significant chunk of gross production value, and of which livestock forms about 42%. And you can see that poultry and eggs represent about 17% of that total pie, followed by beef, milk, and then sheep, goats, pork and wool and other livestock related industries. So 2 big sectors. Next up is field crops, which is also a big chunk of South Africa's agricultural space, making up about 30% of that GPV. And you can see that within that section, maize represents about 14%. So that's the biggest chunk within field crops. And it's also one of the most volatile sections within the field crop space. Reason for it being because of climate, because of weather. So most of our field crops are non-irrigated, and rainfall, and you can see that in the bottom left graph, is the blue section at the bottom, how volatile it actually is. So that's as opposed to, let's say, horticulture and animal products, which is a lot more stable because it's not weather related, right? So talking about area composition of the major grains and oilseeds, it also reflects the revenue contribution. So we can see that white maize forms the biggest chunk of about 1,500, it's 1.5 million hectares planted of white maize, followed by yellow maize of about 1.1 million. And then we've got soybeans and sunflower seeds and sorghum. The one thing that's important to note here is that maize being the biggest chunk, soybeans have actually been has actually been growing quite significantly over the last couple of years. And then if we look at winter grains, that was the summer grains. If we look at winter grains area planted in 2024, wheat represents about 500,000 hectares, which is 60% of the winter grain crop, and is by far the largest section. Most of the winter grains and oilseeds is in the Western Cape, right? Okay, so jumping over to horticulture, that's more my speciality area, as we're agricultural economists based in Limpopo, but we work on citrus and macadamias and avocados. this is kind of my area of expertise. And if we look at the gross value of agricultural production over the 21 to 23 area, we can see that it also represents about 29% of the total agricultural space, with deciduous and other fruits about 8%, citrus fruits about 7%, veggies 5%, and then the smaller sections, potatoes, viticulture, subtropical fruit, nuts, and other horticultural products, the remainder of it. It's very important to note here that the extensive exposure to certain international risks and domestic infrastructural risks create a very, very tough environment for our export-oriented horticulture. That makes it extremely complex to manage, and we'll explore a couple of those in the following slides. I think because it's such a big export part, I want you to note on the left-hand side how fruits and nuts is about 80 billion rand worth, and that's mostly export value. And you can see that citrus forms the biggest chunk of it. Bottom left, you can see citrus contribution within that is massive, followed by grapes and palm fruit, and then the remainder of nuts, berries, and stone fruit. So in terms of export volumes of major commodity groups, we can see that citrus, palm fruit, and grapes is about 90% of total volume exported. So this is a massive chunk. So citrus exports about 2.6 million tons every year. Palm fruit about 850,000 tons. Grapes 375,000, and the remainder is made up of stone fruit, nuts, subtropical, and berries. So, and just to contextualize this, over the 3.8 million tons of citrus, palm fruit, and table grapes exported in 2023, it's comparable in volume to the size of the maize crop exported in 2023, but way exceeds it in terms of value. So export is a high value. All right. I don't have a good joke to tell you guys. All right, let's just give it a second. Maybe just to make up time. John.
meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you
Thanks
too.
for coming through.
Yeah.
Sorry about this copy.
No. It happens.
Yeah, we had a flash.
Something
I
happens.
think the screen pulls a shit and it keeps tripping.
Yeah, it looks like it. But it's classic how you test everything and then when it matters.
Yeah, they set up already last night.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you drive through this morning?
No, I came to last night. So I woke up early, had a good cup of coffee at 11 minutes. I'm ready for the show.
Cool. Well, thank you. We really appreciate it.
You live in Hoedspruit, right?
I do.
Oh, lekker.
Yeah.
Very well, I study.
But you guys are getting more rain than we are.
Yeah, but it's been slow.
Not good.
Mpumalanga was better. Way better. Our dam level is so low.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was flashing. What did you do? The back of the TV was flashing when you were filming it.
So it's on now.
You got juicier than
Yeah, so it is on still.
everywhere. Yep. Right, they're going off now. Right, they're flashing back.
Now they're probably looking for
What comes up and goes down, comes up and goes down. Okay, we're back. Constant. Okay, we're back. All right. I think we're back. Just don't fucking
Where were we? Let me just go back step. Right. Can you guys put that on full screen for me? All right. Looks like we're back. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Okay. As I was saying, so horticulture being one of the biggest contributors to agriculture exports within South Africa, it's also a major employer. So I want to jump on and quickly just talk about specifically horticulture and where we send our product. So we can see in the orange-yellow color, we can see that most of our crop we export goes directly to the European Union, and that's by value, and that's last year's data. So we can see Europe represents about 50%, 51% of our export markets, followed by Asia, which is also the biggest taker of South African exports, then America and Africa. And when we break that down, when we look at Europe, in terms of fruit and nut exports, we can see how big citrus is into the European Union, as well as in Asia, followed by grapes into Europe. Within the Asian context, grapes is not as big as compared to Europe, but similar amounts of palm fruit going to Asia and Europe, and then followed by berries, stone fruit, and subtropical fruits. So collectively, about 40 billion only going into Europe, followed by about 25, 26 billion into Asia, and the rest America and Africa. Right. South African agriculture employs about 800,000 laborers, with 53% thereof within the horticultural sector. So we can see that horticulture within the bigger agri space is a massive taker of South African jobs, and also, the multiplier effect of how many people there. Ek sal maar 'n dansie doen of iets. right, we're going to give it a go. Ah, I see. Great stuff. We just should have plugged it into that plug. It's fine. All right. Everyone, yeah, I'm going to skip a couple of slides. Let's just get this going again. But the point of the previous slide was horticulture is a massive part of employment within the South African context. Within agriculture, by far the biggest. And I think I want to go on to where my area of expertise is, and this is what we use this benchmarking tool. So we've got willing grower participants that participate in our benchmark study on an annual basis. And what I've done here is I just segregated them by the crops that we do. So you'll see macadamias, we do about close to 10,000 hectares. Avocados, about 5,800 hectares. So macadamias in SA, SAMAC says we've got about 80,000 hectares planted. Avocados, we benchmark about 5,800 of the 20-odd thousand hectares planted. Hard citrus, we do about, call it 19,000 of hard citrus, so that would be your grapefruit, lemons, yeah. Okay, I give up.
Thank you for your patience. Sorry for that technical trade barrier. So, Jean, please come back. Everyone was loving your presentation, so please carry on.
Lucky number 7. Okay. Right. So, yeah. Don't make jokes like that. Okay. So, let's pick up where I left off. I was explaining what we do using this benchmark tool in order to measure profitability and also different areas within the production process and how competitive growers are. Okay, so this is a grower-focused benchmark tool. And I think what I want to start off with is to just show you the tree age distribution of long-term crops. So this is a good indication of horticulture, especially in the north and eastern parts of the country. So within citrus and macadamias and avos. So you'll see avos is in green, and then the hard and soft citrus is in the orange and the light orange. And then you've got macadamias in gold. So the one thing that's very, very obvious here, tree ages is at the bottom. Okay, so 0 to 2-year-old trees, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, all the way to your 30-year and older trees here. And then percentage of a farmer's hectares under that specific tree age. So pretty much what this graph says is most of our industry is the trees are only 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So it's very young. So we've got a lot of young trees. We've got a tsunami of young trees coming into production in the next couple of years. So everyone, including the CGA and Saga, all the Hortgrow and all those industries, are trying to make sure that Transnet is online. The ports can actually really uptake all this new trees and new crop that is going to come into production in the next 3 to 6 years. But this also puts significant cash flow pressure on growers. Okay, so let's just go through a couple of these. Okay, so on avocados, it's a mature, well-regulated industry. It's got limited export markets. We mainly focus on the European Union and the UK, but luckily this year, India, China, and Japan opened, so we are now trying to explore new markets and send fruit to those markets. But there's implications for that, right? Phytosanitary implications, but you guys know much better than myself. All right, so 2021, 2022, that's post-COVID. That's when the reefer container cost skyrocketed, went up by more than 200%, and it put severe pressure on the cost chain. So the returns back to farm was extremely low in 21 and 22. In 2023, the cost of the reefer container starts, so that's the cold containers or cooler containers, they started decreasing, but it still ended up at a higher level compared to pre-COVID levels. Okay, so it's at a higher level. So the cost chain is still quite expensive. But then what else happened was in the major production regions, we had excessive rainfall in that time, and we could actually see the decrease in tree health, leading to decreased fruit quality delivered at packhouse level, and I'll show a slide on that in a second. In 2024, we have, as we do every year, but we have this major port challenges. Specifically, all the avos, most of it goes through the Cape Town port, and wind is a significant problem at the Cape Town port. Over and above the fact that Transnet struggles as a rule, we also struggle to get the fruit out of the port, and that Abidjan ship that I mentioned there, we had fruit sitting in the containers for more than 42 days before it got delivered overseas in Europe. So we had terrible, terrible returns, even though the 24 season euro selling prices were extremely high. Peru, they had a drought, and we had a lot less volume from the Peruvian fruit on the European market. So we sold where we used to sell in the middle part of the season. We sell at 3 to 4 euros a carton. That price maintained at 10 euros, 10 euros. So it's a good avocado year. But over the last couple of years, extremely high input costs on direct production costs as well as on the packing side. Severe challenges because the costs they are rising above inflation levels. So it's not CPI related, it's way above. You guys know the electricity cost, how much that goes up by every year. Labor cost, minimum wage doesn't go up by 5 or 6%, it goes up by 9.8%. And then packing material, we saw that in the pack houses, the average annual inflation at packing facilities was about 13% year on year from 2020 to 2024. So that's big jumps in costs for growers to try and offset. So here, what we did is we tried to take a lot of the young orchards out of the equation. We looked at 4-year and older trees, and what we see on the back on farm income per hectare, we see that in 2019, growers got about 146,000 rand a hectare back on farm income, and that just went downhill for the 4th straight year in a row, up till 2022. So you can see the effect that 2021 and 2022, the reefer containers had on the returns back to farm. In 22, we reached 84,000 rand, in which we needed to cover 60,000 rand of direct input costs. So we were already on fine margins in the 21 season, but then that decreased completely in 2022. 23, we had a kicker, much better returns back to farm because of the cost chain easing up a bit, specifically reefer containers. And this year, because Peru has that drought, it looks like we might have one of the best ever years we've had in a long time. So that's very good for the avocado industry. On the right-hand side, you'll see what's happening to production cost. This is quite obvious, but this graph is just ticking up, and it's above inflation. Okay. This is one slide I just sneaked in my presentation. This is a function of about 10 of the biggest avo pack houses in South Africa. And what we've been seeing is percentage of total fruit as a result of insect damage. Okay, so it hovers about the 2.5–3% level for the 2018 to 2021 season, and then 22 and 23, that kicked up to more than 5 to 5.5%. So we see this big kick in insect damage, specifically on avocado fruit, and this is because of multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is it's in close proximity to macadamia orchards, and macadamia growers were under severe pressure. And also, as you very well know, much better than myself, we don't have the same amount of registered chemicals to protect our macadamia crop. So that decreases our efficacy on crop spraying on the max, and that actually negatively impacts our avocado orchards as well. So this is interesting to see. All right, quickly looking at what I call hard citrus. So I kind of excluded the soft citrus from this equation. But yeah, it's a mature industry. It's got tons of export markets. And South Africa is the second biggest exporter of citrus in the world, with very aggressive expansion. You saw how many young orchards we are planting and have been planted over the last 8 years, and all of that's coming into production. So in 2021, we had the higher cost of the reefer containers affecting citrus as well. And in 22, we had the Russia-Ukraine war that also had negatively impacted our returns for growers, and also where we needed to ship our fruits because shipping lines got affected. Almost similar to what's happening now with the Middle East war. That's also affecting, for instance, Kenyan growers and where they can send their fruit, and that oversupplies other markets. So in the 2023 season, grapefruit actually under severe pressure for the second year. We see a declining market for South African grapefruit and grapefruit as a rule, specifically in the Asian markets. So that put pressure on other markets as well. On oranges, we've actually been doing quite well this year specifically, where growers used to get about between 1,800 rand a ton for local juice, so fruit that stays behind in the local juice factories. That number has now kicked up to 5,500 rand a ton. So that's a massive difference for South African orange growers. And that's as a result of two things: Asian greening disease in Brazil, as well as the drought, as decreased Brazil, which produces a significant amount of world orange juice. And that's why we get this kicker in terms of returns for local juice price on oranges. But same with the avos, we see the same thing. We see this cost price squeeze. We see the higher input cost and packing costs really putting pressure on South African growers, because we are such a huge consumer of, as you saw, labor, which is a massive cost item. It's the biggest production cost item for South African avocado and citrus farmers. And then electricity to pump water, and then packing material in the pack houses going up at very, very, very elevated levels. All right, so just to show you a picture of how sporadic and volatile returns on farm is for an average citrus farmer. So once again, we took out the younger orchards, focused on 4-year and older trees, and we said for an average South African citrus farmer, in 2019 they returned about 145,000 rand a hectare. 2020, everyone wanted to eat vitamin C because of COVID, so the prices literally skyrocketed through the roof, and we had the best citrus season ever, and we returned 240,000 rand almost per hectare. The year after, it dropped out of the bus because of the cost change. We only returned 129,000 rand a hectare in 2021, and in 2022, only 94,000 rand a hectare. So you can see it's very obvious that only returning 94,000 rand a hectare, trying to cover production costs of 90,000 rand a hectare, they were actually almost returning negative gross margins. So not negative net margins, gross. That's a very scary situation. 2023, with reefer containers recovering, it kicked up quite a bit, and prices recovered quite well. We got extremely good returns, and an average farmer returned about 200,000 rand a hectare to cover the 90,000 rand of production cost they need, and then start covering overhead costs and interest. And then 2024, I highlighted, I think we're going to have an even better year for citrus. So you see this massive jumps, in return on income. So this is the kind of risk that a South African farmer needs to try and manage, and this has huge cash flow implications for them as well. So, and the cost just runs away from them. So we are in a situation where we see that cost squeeze taking place. Right, on the macadamias. This is, I call it a young industry, but it's not a mature industry yet. A lot of things are changing. It's going at a very, very quick pace. We have got many export markets, but we are heavily weighted in China. So more than 50% of our nuts end up in China. And it's not as regulated, for instance, as citrus and avocados. So yeah, and we also have imports into China, so there's that kind of risk as well. It's not a risk, but it's a challenge for us because we can't be as competitive as other producing regions. So what's been happening with our price returns? You can see in 2021 we got about 68 rand a kilogram. The year before we got 81 rand a kilogram, and the year before 74. So it was 74, 81, 68, 47, 31. So the price for a macadamia nut halved in a 4-year period. This year we got about 9 rand a kilogram better, so it's a 30% increase in price. But still, our break-even price for macadamias is sitting, for an average macadamia grower, sitting at around 52 rand a kilogram. So we still, for the second year in a row, we're selling nuts at below break-even. So this is a significant challenge for South African macadamia farmers, and we're not actually in a great space. So if any one of you sell a lot of chemicals to the mac growers or fertilizer, that's kind of your challenge. That's back on farm income per hectare. And this is where I excluded all those young orchards, so I only focused on mature farming companies. Income 220,000 rand, 180,000 rand, 146, 141, 54,000 rand a hectare in 2023. This year, with our price kicker, we think we're going back up to about 107,000 rand a hectare, which puts us in a better situation, but it doesn't help us to cover all those young orchards that's not contributing. So almost all our industries, avos, max, and citrus, reach maximum yield potential only in year 13, 12, 13, 14. And you saw how many young orchards we're carrying that's weighted age 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So all of those crop is not yet in full production and needs to be carried by the cash flow of these companies. And even on mature orchards, it's decreasing, right? So on the max specific. So you can see the cost. So one thing that's very interesting in the 23 season, you see the cost actually start inverting. So what happened here is growers actually stopped fertilizing completely. Stopped fertilizing decreased on everything, from consultants to laborers to everything. They had to cut everything that they could because that was actually the third year in a row with negative net returns. So Mac industry in a dire space, and we really need that price to recover. And our over-reliance on China to subside. Right. So I already spoke about this, the gross margins. Okay, so let's just go on to the forecast where we think things are going. For the macadamias, we know that the price is still under pressure for 2025, but there is a little bit of optimism. We think there's another 15% increase potential. We saw the last little bit of the season that there was extra pull for kernel, and the price kicked up quite a bit, which is very, very good for the South African macros. But we are going to produce close to 100,000 tons next year, which means we're putting more volume on the market. So basic economics, when we put more volume on the market, price doesn't go up, it goes down. So we're sitting in a weird space at the moment, and we're struggling to predict what the price is going to be. But we know that we need to aim for that 52 rand a kilogram, and we're sitting at 40 at the moment. So we're far off, okay? On avocados, I think we're going to have pretty much an average yield year, but the price forecast is going to be lower for next year. We're not going to have the same price returns this year because Peru will be in recovery from their drought caused by their El Nino, and they'll probably put significant volumes on the market next year. On the citrus, price forecast also looks stable, but once again, with Brazil not being in the market with orange juice, we're going to have the same level of local juice prices. So for the third year in a row, we're going to have a phenomenal citrus season if all else holds constant, and nothing does. So we'll see. But yeah, cost squeeze likely to decrease our competitiveness in SA. And yeah, that's it from me. We made it through it.
Jean. So maybe we will open the floor very quickly to questions, because as you can see, we are very delayed on our initial schedule. No questions? Okay. So then maybe we can move to the next presentation, which is mine. And I will provide you today with an update on the EU Green Deal. So this will be an update on the EU Green Deal and the impact on Africa. And this will be before the presentation from BFAP, who will provide you with a more in-depth presentation on the impact of the EU Green Deal on South African agriculture. So I think that by now you're all very familiar with the EU Green Deal. You've been hearing it for the past few years. And but just to remind you, it's the EU package of sustainability policies, and it's the EU ambition to be carbon neutral by 2050. So it's composed of several legislations which touch upon various sectors. So of course today I will focus on the ones that are relevant for our industry, and the ones that might have impact for South African exporters. So there are two main sets of legislations: the Farm to Fork strategy and the Chemical strategy for sustainability. So first, let me set a bit the current EU political context. You may be aware that there has been, in June this year, European Parliament elections. So what we might expect in the coming years is more protectionism, less progress on the green agenda, because now the European Parliament is a bit more divided. So the Greens are less than in the previous Parliament, but now the Rights have more seats. So that's why we expect more protectionism. As I said, the Parliament is a bit more fragmented, so it might lead to more difficulties in the adoption of legislations. On the Commission side, the European Commission has also been renewed, And last year, the European Commission has undertaken a strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture, which consisted in gathering all the stakeholders in Europe, from growers to industry to NGOs, academia, civil society, and to take their views on the future of the EU agriculture. And in this EU strategic dialogue, there are a lot of references to reporting, to relying less on imports and to strengthening the competitiveness of EU farmers. And this is very much aligned with the EU idea of strategic autonomy. So more focus on trade barriers is expected through maximum residue limits, and more developments in green diplomacy, which I will present soon, are also expected. On the other hand, the good thing is that now the European Commission would like to consult more with third countries, which is a good news, and they would like also to assess more the impact of their policies on third countries, which was not necessarily the case before. Also, we expect positive developments in terms of innovations, new breeding techniques, and biopesticide legislations. So this legislation, I will be very brief because now it has been withdrawn, but it's the sustainable use of pesticides regulation. It was in discussion for the past the last 2 years, I think, in the European Union. And the objective was to reduce the use of pesticides by 50% by 2030, to reduce by 50% the hazardous pesticides, and to increase by 25% agriculture under organic land by 2030. However, due to several farmers' protests and political disagreements, the European Commission the President of the European Commission has herself called for this legislation to be withdrawn. So the targets are still present in the Farm to Fork strategy. However, we don't know whether it will be translated into legislation. And it seems that it's quite unlikely. So the second legislation is the EU Green Diplomacy, which is basically the ambition of the EU to export the EU Green Deal. Because they have the principle that if they want to be carbon neutral by 2050, it's also a global approach. So they have the ambition to export the EU Green Deal through trade agreements and in international forums. So there are two key initiatives that are relevant for the sector under green diplomacy. So the legislation on sustainable food systems, for which now there is not much progress, and the environmental aspects. So this is the ambition to take into account environmental aspects when assessing requests for import tolerances for active ingredients that are no longer approved in the EU. So that's very relevant for third countries, and that would definitely have an impact for South Africa. And just to provide a brief example on environmental factors, there has been developments, I think it was last year. The European Commission has decided to lower MRLs for two active ingredients, clothianidin and thiamethoxam. This will be into application in March 26. And other active ingredients are expected to follow. However, at the moment, it seems that it's on hold. So we are not sure exactly what is going to happen. Also, a brief update on maximum residue limits. In September 2024, the European Parliament has rejected proposed maximum residue limits for several substances that I will not pronounce, but you can see them on the screen. It's a bit difficult. And these substances were already banned in the EU for a toxicity reason, and the Parliament has opposed the Commission's attempt to maintain certain MRLs for those substances based on import tolerances. And they have insisted to put it at limit of detection, which is the lowest level of concentration. And the key point here is that we see new dynamics emerging in the EU, and especially in the European Parliament following the elections, because now the Greens have voted against this for environmental and human health reasons. However, the Rights have voted against to protect European farmers. So trade barriers, basically. And this new alliance, if we can call it that way, is a bit of a concern and really going in the direction of protectionism. And Rod mentioned that earlier today about the mirror clauses, which is basically the ambition of the EU to apply EU health and environmental standards to imported agricultural and agri-food products. The ambition behind this is to create a level playing field with all farmers around the world, but how it's really seen in reality is, again, protectionism. So now the second set of legislations, I will also be quite brief. So there are several legislations under the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, which we expect will lead to several trade barriers. And the first one is hazard classes. So the European Union has the ambition to revise its hazard classes legislations. And the issue with that is that they are looking at subcategories such as endocrine disruptors based on environmental and health concerns. And the problem is that it will unlikely be aligned with the global harmonized system. So in this regard, we also expect some trade barriers. Then there is the EU export ban. I think you may have heard that, but it's the ambition of the EU to ban the production for export for substances that are not approved in the EU. And the issue we see with that is that it completely disregards the local situation. Some active ingredients are for sure not needed in the EU because they don't have the same climatic, geographic conditions. However, countries around the world have very different, let's take South Africa, have very different local conditions. It might also lead to difficulties to source high quality products, and it will lead to shortage of essential solutions to control key products, and it might also displace or even create new problems because we might see the issue of counterfeit pesticides increasing. And the third one I wanted to mention under the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability is the PFAS, so perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Sorry for the pronunciation. But the EU is drafting a proposal to restrict the use of PFAS. So at the moment they are looking into consumer goods, so packaging, but then they will look at agricultural products. And the definition and the thresholds they are looking into, based on our colleagues' assessment in Europe, CropLife Europe, it can be expected that 42 more active ingredients might be banned, might be removed from the market moving forward. I'd like to emphasize on the fact that this is still this is hypothetical. We don't know what will be the impact on the agricultural sector, but it's expected that it will have an impact. So it's still the very early stage of the legislative process. So that's why I'm saying it's hypothetical, but impacts are expected. So, impact of the EU Green Deal, we can expect a smaller toolbox for farmers in non-EU countries, restrictions on imports of agricultural products from non-EU countries to the EU, less predictability of the EU regulatory system, and some slippery slope on environmental objectives. So, the objective of protecting the environment, but actually leading and creating some other problems which might also have impacts for the environment. So you may be wondering, okay, so what now? What we recommend as CropLife Africa Middle East is that this EU Green Deal, its challenges, it's also opportunities. It's opportunities in the sense that it's a catalyst for change. So it can be an opportunity to gain a competitive advantage. There's no doubt that there is a need to transition towards more sustainable food system. On the other hand, it will be also increasing challenges, and especially for growers who will want to access the European market. So it's really essential to anticipate those impacts. It's really essential to have in-depth knowledge of those impacts, to gather data, to gather evidence. That's why there is a necessity for a proactive approach in order to navigate those regulations and to ensure a smooth transition and ensure that South African exporters can still continue exporting towards the EU. So that's why we say information is key. And information is key to be able to raise South African voices. So exporters need the right information at the right time. Exporters need to know what is being discussed at EU level, what will be the legislations that will impact them. But so do the regulators. They need also to hear from people on the ground, from growers, from the industry, to be able in the future to make informed and evidence-based decision-making. So that's why we, as CropLife AME, we have commissioned, so in Morocco, together with CropLife Morocco, an impact assessment and assessing the impact of the EU Green Deal on Moroccan agriculture. And the same has been done for South Africa, which will be presented after by the Marnus from BFAP. And the approach we would like to put forward is that there is no one-size-fits-all. There is no one approach that can suit everybody. And the EU ambition is laudable, but it will not work for everybody. So just very briefly, what lessons have we learned from this impact study that has been done in Morocco, which is also a key EU trading partners. They are exporting a lot of agricultural commodities to the EU. And the experience showed that any decision to withdraw active ingredients from plant protection products at EU level will lead to similar decision in Morocco, because Morocco, since they export a lot towards the EU, the authorities will follow what's happening in the EU. So that's why in this context there is a scenario involving the prohibition of certain active ingredients that could emerge, and there are 31 active substances currently found in 273 products that could potentially be withdrawn from the market. And the impact that has been shown is that it will have impact on Moroccan exports, increased production costs, increased risk of resistance, decline in yields and diversity, and pressure for sustainable practices, because with fewer options available, there is a push towards adopting sustainable methods, but a lot of smallholder farmers or farmers in general are not necessarily ready for this. And just a quick graph to show that with the withdrawal of those active ingredients, it is expected that 37 crops might be affected, with the main ones being tomatoes, apples, wines, pears, citrus, sugar, and others. And what I would like to also emphasize is that you may be aware that in the EU, when they decide to ban an active ingredient, then they can, let's say, reauthorize it via derogations. However, this system does not necessarily exist elsewhere. And we can see, I hope it's not too small, but on the left graph, the number of derogations that have been granted to EU member states. So, for example, for Austria, in the past few years, at least 20 derogations have been granted following the ban of active ingredients on the EU market. Denmark, at least 18, and so on. And then on the right, you can see for which active ingredients those derogations have been granted. So how to do? First of all, as I said, information is key. Gather evidence, gather facts on the impact on the industry, on growers, gather case studies. Rod mentioned it, that we have, as CropLife AME, engaged with several ambassadors from Africa at EU level to raise their awareness on those issues, asking them to engage with the European Commission, and also calling for a green transition that is localized to Africa. So this is the kind of outreach that can be done. At South African level, we really encourage that the industry. So I know CropLife South Africa is already doing this. The growers that you engage with your local stakeholders. You can also engage with the South Africa Embassy in Brussels at WTO South Africa. We are trying to encourage them to engage with the WTO, with the regional economic communities, with African Union, but already at your level, at local level, try to engage with your local stakeholders and maybe address directly to CropLife South Africa. So to conclude, advocacy must really fit discussions by highlighting the local specifics, again, because one size does not fit all. Thank you.
So, thank you, Margot, for the presentation. What means the Green Deal? Oh, mic's on. Oh, sorry. So, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation that you have given us, and also the experience, the impact study in Morocco, and also what we have been doing at CLAMI. So thank you very much. I think I need to introduce myself. My name is Fasil Tadessa. I recently joined CropLife Africa Middle East as Eastern and Southern Africa coordinator. Saying that, I came here just to introduce the next presentation that we will be having on the European Green Deal and Southern African agriculture, the potential impact of reduced pest control options by Candace and also Marnus from the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy, BFAP. So by saying this, I would like to invite Marnus is here. Okay. So Marnus, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Can Candace hear us? Sorry, I'm just checking with the back. She said we were muted. So, if we can start the presentation. I'm from BFAP. Candace is online. She's going to be doing part of the presentation. She knows fruit. She's our fruit and nut lady at BFAP. We've just completed a study for CropLife. We only went about 6 months over the deadline, so we think it's a good one. We hope it's worth the time. Okay, just waiting. So we're presenting some of the main findings of the study. It's about a 70-page study. We just submitted it last week, 2 weeks ago. So it's still very fresh. We have included feedback from commodity organizations. I think it will go through a round of review by your members as well. So there will probably be some questions after the presentation. We can't cover everything, but please have a look at the report when it comes out. It's always difficult to present as an economist to people who know more about the topic than we do. And I flunked my first semester of chemistry. I'm a BSc Agriculture Economics. We're forced to do chemistry first year, so chemistry is not my best subject. But I'll take the high road or the loophole like Margot, and not mention the actors by name, or I'll not mention the easy ones. Where are we going? Here we go. So the Green Deal, we've seen. Sorry, I can't see the. Can we change the? There you go. I'm not going to cover the Green Deal too much in the Farm to Fork strategy. It's been covered by Rod, and Margot already. I'm not going to talk too much about the mirror clause. You understand it by now. I would like to say something about the indicative list of chemicals, indicative list of banned and severely restricted chemicals. So when we started the project, we kept coming back to the question, but which chemicals? So we've been supplied with a list of chemicals that was distributed under consultations done in 2023 by the Commission. They did indicate in a number of places this is only an indicative list, and they can still add chemicals to or actives to this list, and they can still remove some of these actives, but we had to start somewhere. So we had to look at these chemicals on these actives, and we looked at what are the chemicals used in South African agriculture and which chemicals are on the list, and we worked from there. So I'm not going to talk too much about the MRL levels. That's been covered by Margot as well just now. And in order to focus the study, which could potentially be quite vast, we looked at maize, because maize is the biggest crop, field crop in South Africa, and it's vitally important for food security. And we looked at the main three exported crops in value to the EU, the most important export crops. We've run these models, farm-level models, for a number of years now, so we kind of looked at the actives and what would happen if we don't have these actives available anymore. How would farmers react? What would be the farm-level impact? We ran those impacts in the BFAP sector model. We cover about 53 commodities and derivatives of commodities, and these link to local prices, local production hectares, yields, international prices, ability to pay, what's happening in China, what's happening with weather in Australia or in Brazil and Argentina. So all of these link up with your macros and your micros and your macros, and we kind of model what the impact could be looking forward. I'll talk about maize, and then Candace is going to cover horticulture. You'll see there a map of dry land maize production in South Africa. And on the other side, you see the exports over the last 5 years. So maize is not a major, or the EU is not a major market for South African maize. We do export, and especially over the last 5 years when we had good seasons, we do export about 130 to 150,000 tons of maize, largely to Italy, France, Portugal, Spain. And when we initially looked at this, we thought, okay, but that should probably be non-GM yellow maize. But all of that has been over the last 5 years, largely been GM white maize. GM white maize being exported out of Durban, so just on Durban's over there. So because we have a failed railway system at the moment still, transport is vitally or really expensive in South Africa, so mainly maize that is produced on the eastern side of South Africa is exported through Durban Harbour. And what we're saying is GM white maize coming from the eastern side, going out of the harbour, is likely to continue to be the maize that is exported. So when we do analysis, we're looking at farmers producing in Eastern Free State, Mpumalanga, and in KZN, KwaZulu-Natal. Sorry, I can't see you. I do have my glasses on. So the main decision the maize industry and perhaps maize farmers need to make is, do they want to continue exporting to the EU? Is it worth making the changes if we no longer have these actives available? What is the impact on cost production? Is this market important enough to South African farmers to try and segregate or have an identity preservation system in place as we currently have with GM maize? We've been doing this for 20 years. Our farmers know how to do it. We have Africa putting up silos or keeping silos out just for GM maize. So it might turn out, and Margaret spoke about an opportunity for early adopters. It might be an opportunity for maize farmers. But if you look at the analysis, and just the last point before we move on, South Africa is currently exporting maize to the EU. And we are doing that despite the fact that we are currently using pest control actives that have already been banned in the EU. And the reason why we can do this is because the MRL levels are below the levels that can be picked up. So as long as that can be in place, and as long as even if we do lose a number of additional actives, we can still continue exporting. And this is important when you look at grain and oilseeds, I guess. the period of since application of the chemicals till harvest and for transport and storage, it tends to be a longer period from application till it reaches the market. So MRL levels tend not to be that big a problem. I saw the Grain SA did publish a CropLife article in one of their journals in the last couple of months, and that's vitally important, especially for the industry organizations, to keep a track on what is happening with MRL levels. So we're going to do this analysis, and we're looking at the changes, but it might be that despite the fact that we might be losing some of these actives, it might still be possible to export grain to the EU. These are the chemicals that are currently used in maize and that are also on this indicative list of banned and severely restricted chemicals. 2,4-D, acetochlor, atrazine, and bromixanil. I'm not going to try the others. We know chlorpyrifos has already been removed from the South African list now. Since the 1st of November, it's not allowed anymore to sell chlorpyrifos in South Africa. But if you look at the graph there on the other side, we've lost about 50, and these are actives and combinations of actives over the last, 10 years. So we spoke about the box of tools, and that box of tools are getting emptier and emptier. Looking forward, the grayed out space there is the number of actives that will be reviewed in the EU over the coming period. And you'll see in 2024, 25, and 26, there's a lot of them that's going to be reviewed. We don't know what's going to happen. Thinking, for instance, about glyphosate. Glyphosate was reviewed last year and received a 10-year extension. So it's not like they're just cancelling, but there's a stricter review of these chemicals. And going forward, it is likely that, as we said, the toolbox are going to become emptier. So in the report, we're not going to go into detail on this in this today, but we discuss all of these actives, their current users, the current alternatives, being alternatives registered still in the EU and that have lost their registration in the EU. And we're looking at impacts, and most of those impacts are on a cost level. There are alternatives available. These alternatives are similar in efficacy and management, but they tend to be more expensive. On the right-hand side there, we are comparing the current pest control budgets for farmers in KZN, Bloedrivier area, Mpumalanga, Middelburg, and Trichardt. Mpumalanga, also Ermelo, and in the Eastern Free State, that's the Rights to Bethlehem area. And what we're saying, if we assume a 20% pest control impact, the cost is going to be there, but it's not insignificant, but it's not that substantial. Farmers in the Eastern Free State have already indicated that they no longer use these actives, so there are options. And just thinking about where the maize will be sourced if we want to export in, we tend to have higher rainfall and earlier rainfall in the eastern parts of the country. Those farmers plant higher populations of maize, so you tend to have canopy closure quite early in the season, which means that you don't use that high levels of herbicides. But because due to the higher planting populations and higher rainfalls, we tend to have more problems with fungicides and pests, or fungi and pests. So those costs are really mainly around fungicides and pesticides, and to a lesser extent about herbicides. But it means that the farmer will lose, if he has to move away from those indicated actives, he'll lose probably around 100 to 315 rand per hectare. So again, moving back to the option of, is this a market our farmers want to feed into? It might be an opportunity, like GM. If they can get a better price for their maize in the European market, that might be an option. But you also have to look at the cost of identity preservation through the whole planting, harvesting, and transport and storage process, because that does become substantial. So just in conclusion on maize, we do not think, based on the current list of actives, that it will have that big an impact on the maize industry. It might be a bit of an opportunity for our farmers. And the main reason for this is we don't export that much maize to the EU. There are alternatives available, and they are slightly more expensive, but not that much. And we are hoping some additional or new products will come onto the market. And currently, the MRLs are being well managed, and going forward, that will be increasingly important. I'm going to switch to Candace now. Kandas, kan jy ons hoor? Jy kan maar gooi, Kandas. Groei die mense. Kandas, ons kan jy nog nie hoor nie.
Marnus,
Daar sê, ek hoor jou.
success.
Daar sê.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for that I can present to you virtually. I think you can put the presentation back up on the screen. I did try to get Marnus to do it, but maybe I'm lucky in Cape Town, and he'll present it in person on that side. I think I'll proceed with the poem fruit next. If you guys can just put that, yes. You don't need to see me. Already. Marnus, will you be doing the clicking?
I think you can do it yourself. Okay.
Okay. No, I don't seem to be able to click on my side. Thanks. Okay. So similar to what Marnus has presented, we've got the approvals that has expired already, and then those that come up for review over the next couple of years. The 2024, 25, 26 being critical years for our palm fruit industry in terms of the actives that's in the process of being renewed or to lapse. Of course, similar to the maize side, this will affect us in terms of just the toolbox that's getting emptier in the process. What we have on the right is just a non-exhaustive list of chemicals that we do use at farm level. This is obviously different by region and by approach for the different producers in different regions, and there's a longer list. This is just, I think, the ones that I've selected to put in here was the ones that where the expiration date is coming up sooner rather than later, and also some of those that's already in a not approved state. So this is what we're dealing with, and we try to focus on the prominent ones that will have the biggest impact to simulate our scenarios. So what we first, so with the fruit, we try to kind of start off with what do we expect to happen. So firstly, the biggest focus here was on mancozeb. That's very effective for scab, and the indicators from industry was that we have alternatives that is effective. They're just more costly. So and either we have to use them more frequently. So there's a cost implication. So first of all, what we modeled here was to say, a producer would typically try to absorb that cost first, which will have a profitability impact. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a trade-off between supplying the EU market with these restrictions or not supplying the EU market and being free of the restrictions. Because of the previous slide where we indicated all these other plant protection products that will come up for review over the next couple of years, we assumed a 5% general increase in cost on farm level and also a 5% impact on our quality at the end of the day. So typically on our export share. And then we've modeled this, and it was kind of interesting in the palm fruit industry. And I think what you'll see is that we've got, we did 3 industries, and they all respond differently. So in terms of the palm fruit, what we started off with was saying you have this additional cost at farm level. With all the other actives that we're losing, you might have some impact on your export share of your crop. But at the end of the day, that additional cost that you're going to incur at farm level, additional labor for quality control and all those kind of things, would probably, you can lessen the impact of that quality impact of the 5% that we've introduced. However, if we look on the right-hand side, where the solid lines is our profitability, our baseline expectancy in terms of profitability, and you'll see it really ramp up there over the second half of the next of our outlook period, and that is mostly driven by increased yields and export shares. So not so much a price impact, but rather the industry adapting to changing conditions. And then the dotted lines is the scenario where we've introduced whatever we've described here on the left-hand side, so additional cost and some impact on our export share. And you can see that we've got a bigger impact on our apples than on our pears. And that's quite interesting because I was assuming, given how they are similar in terms of the baseline, that the impact will be similar. But what we do see is now, I think with the apples, it's just our export share is already a lower percentage than for our pears. And so having that impact just creates that, it just takes you below that critical mass of export volumes within your basket of production. So next up, what we have here is the impact at an industry level. So the assumption here was the producer would make a decision to remain within business and do it according to the new legislative requirements. And then at the end of the day, some of them will, due to that profitability impact, pull out at the end. And what's interesting is, for example, our apples, we send about 8% to the EU, whereas with pears, we send about 28%. And so for pears, the EU market is much more important than for our apples. So if we were to have all these producers and you have that profitability impact on your at farm level, some of them would just not be able, or they would just not be willing to continue to produce and replant as necessary to keep their farms within the same production volumes over time. So what we expect from this removal of mancozeb, and then just the general for all the others that we're not explicitly mentioning, is that we'll probably see around a 3 to 3.5% loss in area and consequently our volumes as well on the palm fruit side. However, it's possible to negate some of this on the apple side, especially because we would probably see some producers just making the choice to not export their apples to the EU. So just key messages from the palm fruit, we'll probably see around production decline of around 3%, total value in terms of the money generated in the industry, a loss of around 4% compared to the baseline. And then in terms of the market split, slightly less export share, and that is because of the impact on quality, just less fruit on the tree that's exportable in the class 1 especially. And then in terms of area, 3 to 3.5%. Jobs will be linked to the volume and the area. And then profitability at farm level, there's about a 1/3 reduction on the pears, more for apples, but the alternative for apples is to not export to the EU. Next we have table grapes. So similar structure at the beginning, looking at the tools in the toolbox we've already lost, the ones that's being under review over the next couple of years, and then on the right-hand side, just a list of what we're currently using and those that may fall away or change. I think the biggest one that we're focusing on here is specifically the Metamorph that was deregistered in May of this year. So what we did here was again trying to understand, how would the industry react. So firstly, if we don't have the Metamorph, which is very effective in control of downy mildew, it will firstly affect all regions, but it will affect the Orange River region less, and that is just because of the weather conditions that's not so conducive for the development of downy mildew. And then again, similar to pome fruit, just to account for other changes that will happen in terms of our production cost and our export percentages due to the deregistration of other actives, we've simulated an additional 5% impact. So there's some alternatives for the Metamorph, however, and they're slightly cheaper, but there's a quality impact expected of around 10% export packouts reduction, and then also just because of this second component that we include, 5% profitability impact, or 5% increase in cost across the board, and also the 5% additional impact on export cartons. So what's interesting is if we look at it from how the industry compares to, for example, the Orange River region. So, obviously it will not be the same for all the producers in all the regions, but also you might find a producer that's not necessarily in the Orange River region, but still able to effectively control without the Metamorph, and that would mean that their output in terms of profitability will be similar to an Orange River producer. However, if we look at, for example, the blue lines, so again, the solid lines being our baseline and the dotted lines our scenario, so having that impact of the higher cost and the lower packouts, it really reduces our profitability quite substantially, and that is expressed in those green bars. So around 60% reduction in profitability for the industry in general, Orange River region around 30%. However, it seems like all is still fine. We're still, above the zero profit line, and this is measured at a earnings before interest, tax, and amortization. So we still need to account for the fact that we either apply for credit in order to establish new vineyards. We still have to pay the producer himself. We still have to pay taxes and interest on operational costs, etc. So if we then consider just the farm profit component, so after accounting for interest and capital repayments, it does become even more bleak, especially on the industry side. So we see that consistently producers would be in the negative. So even though they will make profit on the hectare, they won't be able to make profit in their business as such. So how this will then play out is what we expect is for producers to say, well, then I'm not going to export to the EU because it's costing me too much money at farm level, and to remove their volumes from the EU and push it into other markets. However, we sit with a situation where about 90% of total table grapes are exported, and of that, 57% goes to the EU. So once we take that volume out of the EU and push it into other markets, the whole system kind of collapses, because now we're oversupplying all those other markets. The EU prices shoots up because we don't have enough volumes in that market, and that kind of pushes some producers back into the EU market. However, the impact on our other markets is so severe in terms of the price impact of that oversupply, that it's kind of this unsustainable situation, because now at farm level you would have taken a knock of around 15% in terms of your export back out percentage that will drop. But now in the market, if you push all your volumes into the non-EU markets, you'll probably look at a price reduction of around 38%, which is worse than just taking the knock in terms of the production, in terms of the number of cartons per hectare. So it's kind of this to and fro the whole time. We're sitting with the financial impact at farm level with not being able to use the metamorph, and then on the other hand, if we avoid the EU market and we push everything into the non-EU markets, that price impact is too severe. So it's this constant battle that we're sitting with. At the end of the day, what we'll probably see is a reduction in the number of cartons per hectare, just because of this increased downy mildew that we don't get under control. That will ultimately have an impact on our export value per hectare. That will make us unprofitable, so we can't replace existing vineyards, which will have an impact on the total area under production. And because of now this new area under production that's a smaller quantum, will probably have a reduction in the total export value being generated. So this is like it's a different story to what we saw in palm fruit, and it's quite interesting how the absolute impact is vastly different. So just to summarize, we're looking at probably around a 9% impact on total production volumes, and the total impact on the value generated from the industry, because we have this more of an impact on our export volumes, is around 13%. And then from an area perspective, looking at marginal land in the humid production areas, of around 12% of area, and we're sitting currently around, I think, 20,000 hectares, just below 20,000 hectares in the industry. So probably taking around over 2,000 hectares out of production. Jobs in the pack houses and on farms are linked to these, to area and export volumes. So if those decline, jobs will decline accordingly. The industry, I think, at the moment is currently looking at between seasonal and permanent, around 100,000 jobs. If we have a 12% decrease in volume in area, we'll probably see a similar impact on jobs, and then profitability between 30 and 60% impact at the end of the day on our profit margins at farm level. So citrus, it's always kind of interesting how the different dynamics play out with, we've got 4 major commodity groups within the citrus industry. So what we've got, again, on the left-hand side, all the plant protection products that was already deregistered over the last couple of years, and then also looking at those coming up for review over the next couple of years. And it's mostly similar, but there are some differences per commodity. On the right-hand side, so the industry provided us with some information on the MRLs that's currently applicable. And so what we typically would see is if the approval expires, there could be a change also in the MRL in the process, as what we are currently anxiously awaiting on something like Mancozeb. So the industry, I think it's kind of similar to what we discussed on table grapes, where there's a regionally specific impact. So what I've tried to do here is just to use some of the DALRAT information around citrus greening and citrus black spot. So on the left-hand side, what we have is the yellow area is the citrus greening infected areas. And there's a number of plant protection products that producers can use. One of them is imidacloprid that they use for effective control of citrus greening. On the right-hand side, you'll see citrus black spot that's affecting all of our provinces on the western side, and Mancozeb is a very effective plant protection product on that front. So in some regions we'll have double the impact of losing both. In some regions we'll have very little impact. So just to, if you keep the pictures of the previous slide in your mind, and we're saying that, around 41% of our production of citrus occurs in Limpopo. That's where we have both greening and CBS. Eastern Cape, where we only have CBS. Western Cape, there's some parts of the Western Cape where we have greening. In the major production region, namely the Citrus Dalton William area, we don't have citrus greening, nor do we have CBS. So that's what I've tried to explain on the right-hand side there, is to say, we've got effective control of CBS, we've got products that's effective in the control of citrus greening, and then similar to the previous two examples that we've discussed, is just, for all others that we don't specifically mention, those will only have an impact then on a production region such as Citrus Dal, whereas Letsitele will be affected by all of those impacts that we simulate, and the Sundays River only by the impact of CBS and other. So it's quite interesting how, you can already expect how the profitability will be impacted in the different regions. However, what's quite interesting here is that we, so of course, when we have less, less control and we have impact on our export quality, South Africa as a collective will supply the market with less product. So the market will, find its equilibrium at a new price point. And that is the new price point that will push back into the farm level and look at the profit deviation from the baseline based on the fact that you can either have an impact on your quality, but you also have the impact of the price of the collective on the new farm. So it's at an industry level. So what we, whereas with the first two examples, we first looked at what will be the impact on farm level. But here what we try to find out first is, if we have that, we lose the effective control of CBS, we lose effective control of citrus greening. And I have to mention here that we didn't simulate specifically if that orchards are lost, the biological assets being destroyed in the process. So what we have here is, if this is our export market in the figure, looking at export volumes and export price. And so South Africa is the biggest fresh citrus exporter in the Southern Hemisphere, and that is by far. And then also we ship about 36% of our product to the EU, so we really can't avoid the EU given just the sheer volumes that we're looking at. What we've simulated here from the market perspective is to say that, you know, progressively we're losing our ability to control effectively at farm level for citrus greening, CBS, and just the general that we've modeled. And then what we ended up with was, you know, because of this reduction in volumes and because we are such a big player in that period in the market, we have prices going up faster than the volumes are declining, which is quite an interesting dynamic that we are experiencing in this scenario. So even though we just, in total, for the citrus industry of South Africa, expect around 8% decrease in total volume, we can potentially see the industry growing its total value by 14%. So, as I've explained 2 slides back, was, you know, now with this new price that we're sitting with, so a producer at farm level individually would now supply to the market, having the impact of the loss of effective control at farm level for citrus greening. We've simulated around a 10% decrease in the export backouts. For CBS, we've simulated 20% and general 5% impact on export backouts and a 5% additional cost. So, of course, similar to table grapes, this is just a proxy for regions with similar conditions. So, for example, in the north of Limpopo, we have an area of low pest prevalence, which means that, you know, their impact will probably be different to a region like Letsitele itself. So what we have here is this higher market prices to a certain extent offsets this decline in volumes that we see that we ship at the end of the day, and the commodity mix plays a role. Your market split plays a role, and market split there specifically looking at, you know, so for example, from the Western Cape they can go to the USA. In the Western Cape also, what we see in citrus dal, around 50%. Half of the area is planted with soft citrus, whereas in Letsitele the bulk is oranges. So all of these dynamics play out at the end of the day in how we see profitability and the change in profitability at a regional level. So on the right, what we have here is to say, you know, a region like citrus dal, with their access to the USA, with the bigger component of soft citrus, profitability, and the lesser impact of our citrus greening control methods and CBS that falls away, they will probably see an improvement, given that there's in total less volumes going to the export market. So they will experience the higher prices without having that much of an impact on their production itself. A region like Letsitele, where they are battling with both citrus greening and CBS and don't have the same extent of benefit being introduced, the price impact that we expect on oranges, for example, is lower than the price response from the market on soft citrus, so they will probably be worse off in the process. However, it must be noted here that the average farm size, for example, in Letsitele is about double the size of a farm in citrus dal. So even though, you know, at a per hectare level, we're looking at a significant disparity in terms of profitability, even under baseline conditions, those things are not necessarily taken into account. the size of the farm and the total profitability of the farm. However, I mean, at the end of the day, given the scenarios that we've simulated, we're probably looking at a region like Letsitele being worse affected, with an area such as the Sundays River Valley, probably looking at recovering, balancing between the loss of something like Mancozeb for CBS, but also benefiting from the higher prices. So kind of getting back to a similar situation in terms of profitability. So just to summarize, production volumes to remain fairly constant. I think because of this stable area projection, and this stable area projection is mostly linked to the higher export prices that are offsetting the lower number of cartons per hectare that we project under the loss of these controls. And then as a result of the reduced exports and the higher prices per carton, we can potentially see an increase in the total value generated from the industry. The market split, it will shift slightly, and it will be at a regional level, be differentiated. So a region such as Citrusdal will probably have less of an impact than, for example, Letsitele or Sundays River. And then jobs, because we, under these circumstances, with the increase in the value at the end of the day on prices, probably see area and volume remaining fairly stable, which would mean that we won't see that much of an effect in terms of jobs. But then also, similar to table grapes, the profit will reduce, regionally differentiated based on the fact that some regions are more exposed to certain pests than others. I think it's back to you, Marnus.
Thank you, Candace. Can you just go back to the previous slide, just closing remarks? So I think by this time you would get the message. We're losing tools, and going forward there's probably will be a stronger requirement for commodity organizations to communicate with their farmers on actives that could be used. I think it's already in place, but I think that it will become more important. Also, chemical companies and the agents in the field proactively working with farmers on the actives and managing those maximum residue levels. I think something that came up quite a bit when we were conducting this study is how will chemical companies react to this? We're hoping that you have a pipeline of wonderful products that are going to come out now. We don't know how that's going to change. We also don't know how chemicals that were the alternatives up to now, how that will be priced. If there's a bigger demand for these chemicals and you're going to move bigger volumes, will it become cheaper? Or now that you have a bigger market, will the prices go up? We don't know how that's going to play out. But as Candace just said, and this is basically to maize and the horticultural products, there are different aspects or different impacts on these industries. Farmers will have to decide how they react, and some of them will have limited alternatives or options on how they react. And just the last point there, South African agriculture, to a large extent, our horticulture products are already judged at a very high level of sanitary and phytosanitary standards. Some of those are arguably more political than science-based. Thinking about false coding more for black spot. So going forward, that'll become more difficult to manage, and we already struggling to kind of adhere to these requirements and to stop cross-boundary movement of some of these pests. So going forward and losing these tools, it'll become more difficult. Thank you.
Okay, So thank you very much, Marnus and Candice. So now I think we have the deep analysis of what it means for South Africa agriculture, the EU Green Deal, and the impact of reducing the potential impact of reducing the pest control product options. So now we can have some time to have Q&A. So I will give chance to. Questions from the audience? I don't see any hand. So I don't see any hand. So if so, we can go to the panel discussion. I will introduce our panelists. I think okay. So our moderator will be Eliza from CropLife South Africa, the Advocacy and Communication Manager. Eliza, the panelists will be Cornel, Member Service Lead at Grain South Africa. So would you please take your seat at the stage? Thank you. Another panelist will be Derek from Research and Innovation Manager at Potato South Africa.
Now? Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. And thank you very much, Marnus and Candace, for that great presentation. Also the previous speaker, Jean. Interesting things happening. A lot of data to ingest or digest. Probably not ingest. I think, as Rod said, the idea of this is to start having discussions because obviously something is coming, something is happening. And we hear a lot that, okay, we're starting with the discussions, but where's your data? What are the details? And now we have some data, so let's chat. Okay, so thank you. I think our panelists have already been introduced, but on my right is Cornel Lowe, Applied Economics and Member Services Lead at Grain SA. And then next to him is Dirk Eys, Research and Innovations Manager at Potatoes SA. And next to him is Chris Kleinhal, General Manager at Dry Bean Producers Organisation. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me today and looking forward to the discussions. Okay, so I think just to put everyone on the same page and to give some background, many probably already know you quite well, but could you give us a very broad overview of your respective sectors and its contribution in terms of trade, job creation, hectares and so forth, just the most important highlights in your opinion, so that our audience has the necessary background for the discussions to follow. Cornel, I know in the presentations we already touched on maize, but Grain SA represents much more than that. So perhaps we can start with grains in general in South Africa, and then Dirk, over to you, and then Chris can follow, please.
Cool. Thank you, Alriza. Good afternoon, everyone. As she said, I'm Cornel Lowe. I represent Grain SA. Just a quick snapshot of Grain SA. We are a farmers organisation, a non-profit, also a voluntary organisation. So farmers are voluntarily members of Grain SA. So we have to be on the sharp edge of everything we do and our farmers' needs. We've got more or less 4,500 commercial farmers and between 8,000 and 12,000 developing farmers. The crops that we represent is maize, both white and yellow maize. sunflower, soybeans, groundnuts, grain sorghum, wheat, barley, canola, oats, and lupins. The area that it represents is more or less 5.3 million hectares. The jobs is a difficult one to calculate, but the thumb rule that we use is one laborer per 42 hectares, and that gets you to 125,000 jobs in the grain and oilseed industry. Yeah, Alrisa, that's grain SA.
Thanks, Corné. Yeah, I'm Dirk Uys with Potatoes South Africa these days. So, yeah, we've only got one crop, potatoes, but you get slop chips and you get mashed potatoes. And that's now we see that. So our stats, yeah, we're a bit smaller than Grain SA, but obviously we share the same farm as my colleagues next to me. And yeah, so we look at about, to be exact, 49,841 hectares, call it 50,000 hectares. And yeah, we're producing about 2.5 million tons of potatoes in South Africa, so it's about 100 grams per person per day if you do it like that. But yeah, unfortunately we're not the biggest potato growers in the world, and we don't export much. We only export about 6%, so it's maybe important to keep that in mind with our discussion. Yeah, so the value to the industry is, the direct value is about 12 billion, and the secondary value, if you look at processing and so on, we're looking at about 20 to 25 billion. Jobs is also, we estimate between 50 and 60,000. We've got a colleague here that farms, so yeah, probably about one person per hectare. So for labour, it's a very important crop to keep in mind as well. And I think the important thing to mention when we look at this discussion here is the cost of crop protection for us. It obviously varies from where you plant and if you dryland or irrigation, but we talk about at least 25,000 rand a hectare, going up to 45,000, 50,000 rand a hectare. So I think if you look at the crop protection industry, potatoes is probably one of the more expensive crop protection crops, and a big concern for us. So it's good to be part of this discussion.
Afternoon, everybody. As you've heard, I'm Chris Kleingeld from the dry bean producers. We are an association of members, so we present the commercial farmers in South Africa. We're not a big industry. Currently less than 500 commercial farmers. We produce about 47,000 hectares annually. Roughly, if we have a good season, about 60,000 tons, but we haven't had much of those good seasons the last few years. Even in terms of Africa, we're very small. We only rank 20th in Africa in terms of volume of production and 53rd in the world. We only produce, regardless of all the types of dry beans that you get in South Africa, we only produce 3 types, red speckled beans, small white beans, and large white kidney beans, of which large white kidney beans are extremely small these days. In terms of the grain crops, we are the most labor-intensive crop in South Africa, and it's also a very important protein feed, especially for the reason that it's one of the few plant-based proteins that doesn't need to be reprocessed before you can consume it. So that's where the advantage of dry beans lay. And it's also in a very big part of the community source for household farmers that produce for their own consumption a very important protein. In terms of trade, the industry at farm gate value about 1.2 billion rand. That's excluding the imports. If you take the total industry before the wholesale, about 1.7 billion rand. And as from that figures, you can see that we are net import of dry beans. Yeah, I think that's about the most important things. One thing that is interesting with regard to dry beans, there are niche markets in the world. Although we are net importer, we can very successful export in niche quality markets, especially in Eastern Europe and India. So that's really something that's strange in our industry. So in that sense, it does play a role, especially on red speckled beans. If everything works together in the national market, we can export 17% of our local production, and we normally set it off with imports from Southern Africa back into the local or consumer chain. And the other thing that just needs to be noted is, especially we had the feeling of that in the last climate cycle. If there's a severe constraint in production in South Africa with regard to dry beans, it's true for Southern Africa. So in terms of how we place ourselves in the world in terms of food security with regard to dry beans, it has major implications for the whole southern region, and that implication is very big. I mean, I think that's about what I need to say about the industry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. So we've heard from our speakers in the presentations about the different developments in EU policy and that space, and the possible impact on some of the key export industries, but also touched on grain. And we've seen that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and not in all cases will everyone be affected. Some pockets will be affected, and others not affected at all. Sometimes it's different parts of the value chain. But Chris, tell me, and for dry beans, what in your opinion would be the biggest impact of these policies on your growers and the industry?
I would think from our perspective, as we are not that much influenced by export per se, is the availability of the active ingredients to be able to do crop protection in South Africa. There are certain active ingredients that is really necessary for South Africa to produce dry beans for two reasons. The one is to enhance yield stability, in other words, to make sure that we have a better understanding of management crop risk, which is our biggest problem in South Africa. And then the second is the quality, because the market within South Africa especially is extremely sensitive in terms of the perceived quality of the product. That has more to do with appearance than to value of food per se. So in that sense, that's our biggest concern, that if we lose some of those active ingredients, it will be extremely difficult to manage yield stability in terms of to manage crop risk.
Thank you. Interesting. And Dirk from potatoes, your opinion, please?
Yeah, I must agree with Chris. We also don't export much yet. Hopefully that's going to change. And the problem is the local to get those actives out of Europe and to have affordable crop protection products is obviously going to be very key. So, I mean, these things are not disappearing. What alternatives are there? I think a problem is also the fact that your solutions are getting less. So what are we going to do with things like resistance or whatever we're going to call it, sensitivity shift, to give growers affordable solutions to really manage problems into the future? So I think that is going to be a big focus, and we'll probably get to some solutions a bit later on, but yeah, we'll probably have to look at looking outside this chemistry and looking at alternative crop strategies as well, but we'll probably talk about that a bit later on.
Thanks so much, Dirk. Corno, we've seen that the impacts on maize production might be a bit less than on others, but what in your opinion makes grain production in South Africa different to that from the EU, and what unique challenges do we face?
Arisa, yeah, I think as Marnus also alluded to, for maize, the EU market is not our biggest export market. So I don't think we are too worried about that. For a crop like groundnuts, the EU is quite important. We export mainly to Japan and the EU. I would say what makes us different is the EU is a highly subsidized farming community. So if they get less access to crop protection products, they could be assisted in another way, even though I don't think how much the citizens in the EU would start paying for food. That's a worry. Our biggest concern is the alignment of other countries outside of the EU with the EU policy. Our biggest competitors are the US and the South American countries. And we need to make sure that we rather align our legislation on what they are doing rather than the EU itself.
Thank you. Interesting. And affordability seems to be a trending topic as well, right? Okay, so let's pivot a bit towards some of the solutions. Have you identified any opportunities in light of these impacts, for instance, new trading partners, newer technologies, public-private partnerships to increase efficiencies, any other avenues to make sure these impacts are mitigated to a certain extent? Corner, perhaps we can start with you.
Yes, obviously we continuously look at alternatives. We want to produce safe food all the time. We also want to protect the environment and the farmers and the farm workers alike. So obviously we want to produce sustainably, and we also want to be custodians of the soil and the environment. And our farmers are pretty serious about that. So the more access we have to softer crop protection products, the better. But there's a fine line between alternatives that work now and again and science-proven crop protection products that works when it needs to. Because we are so price sensitive and our profitability is also so sensitive. So we need to make sure we struck a balance between newer products that typically possibly more expensive and not always work like the synthetic agrochemicals we come to know, and then the profitability and sustainability of grain production in South Africa.
Thanks, Corno. Dirk?
Yeah, I think sometimes, maybe I'm a bit of an optimist, but sometimes you need to break a thing before you can fix it. And there was a guy that caused our industry quite a lot of damage, and it was Tim Noakes. I don't know if you remember what he said about potatoes. But I think maybe we didn't quite understand what he said. And one of the points that he made, and he said, and I think it was a law for running that he said it, that we need to know everything. We need to know everything about. We know everything about the limitations, but not enough about the potential of what we can achieve in cropping specifically. And so if I look at solutions, I see probably three things that we can probably use to get this right. And the first one is using natural and beneficial organisms. And there's a project that we are doing together with Grain South Africa, that we should actually include you as well, where we're looking at soil health. These things obviously take a lot of time, but we're seeing that we've got projects that have been running for 10 years now, and we're seeing the beneficials are really reducing those, for example, nematode populations, which is a big problem for us. It's not good enough for 100% control, but I think that opens new doors for maybe products that we threw away in the past, maybe softer biologicals or more specific products. So I think it's understanding how we can work with the environment to help with what we have. We had a similar problem with potato tuber moss as well. We found resistance against organophosphates and the pyrethroids. Can we use beneficials to support us in future to control potato tuber moss? So I think it's working with the environment around us. The second one is how do we use technology like spray technology, spot treatments, for example. I think that could be quite exciting. Once again, in my previous life at one of the crop protection companies, there was many products that were very, very good that we that was put on the shelf because they were just too expensive. But I think the door now opens for some new opportunities there where you can spot treat with the right technology. So I think that's probably another exciting thing. And then the third one is how can we use data and digital techniques to make better decisions? And I think this is, those of you who attended our conference earlier this year might have also heard this discussion. There's a big debate around data, who owns data, and this whole story about data is my intellectual property. I think, with all due respect, I think we must move past that now. We need to start sharing data to make better decisions and look at ways, for example, when we travel, because people share data, we know where problems are on the road. And how can we as an industry start using data to start modeling pests and diseases so that we can be a bit more proactive? And then your intellectual property is in how you interpret that data to make a better decision. So I think that would be, for me, a very, very big one if we can get that right. But it's going to be a big, bold move to get people to share information on that level. But I think that's where industry organizations can also play an important role, like ourselves here. So yeah, that's what I have.
Thanks, Dirk. Chris, besides now partnering up with Dirk and Corne, from your side.
Yeah, I think in our industry we tend to look at the bigger gene pool to see how we can have more tolerant varieties to be able to alleviate some of the risk with regard to crop protection. It is successful, but it's not that successful in terms of the implementation phase, because you get vast differences in short space of geographical changes in terms of how they would react. So that's on the one side, and on the other side, there's been an active role with multinational companies the last 4 years to say how can we expand or access the alternative markets internationally that does not necessarily include the EU, because we feel there's definite need for South Africa to be able to access international markets with regard to dry beans in the future. So that's where we are more focused at this point in time.
Okay, great. So, I mean, I think from the conversations, it's very clear that there's a will to be more sustainable. And I know sustainability is quite a buzzword, and when we look at the details in terms of sustainability, the environment, social, governance principles on top of the sustainable development goals, it becomes a mammoth undertaking with a lot of ripple effects. And just talking about it, it's quite tricky. It also sometimes comes across as something that we are chasing, when in fact agriculture has actually always been just improving on sustainability, but agriculture is a long game. You need to be sustainable, so it's always been top of mind. In your respective sectors, are there some initiatives that you can highlight for us, examples of industry's commitment towards continuous and improved sustainability? Corne, perhaps let's start with you.
Thank you, Alrisa. Yes, as you said, I think it's a continuous process. Over time, our grain farmers have been adopting new systems. That's definitely talking to conservation. We all know in South Africa, 90% of our grain production is done under rain-fed conditions. So if you cannot farm with moisture in South Africa, you're not going to be a grain farmer, or at least be a successful one. So in terms of that, we already need to be farming in a conservation way to be successful in South Africa. But we also now talking about ESGs. It's definitely a talking point in agriculture currently. So we are looking at ways to measure what we are already doing. When I started 20 years back in the grain industry, our farmers used 100 liters per hectare of diesel. Currently it's between 60 and 65 liters. So we are definitely improving as we go. In the term ESG, we have added an extra E in front of the E that talks to economics. And again, we can only do so much if it's economically viable. So we cannot be biological farmers if it doesn't make economic sense. So when we talk about conservation, we need to talk about the economic viability as well. And that's where crop protection products comes in. It helps the farmers with an extra tool in the toolbox to conserve the environment. If it wasn't for products like glyphosate, we wouldn't have been able to conserve so much moisture in our production systems. Then every one of us would have still had to take out all the implements out of the shed and mechanically control our weeds. So yeah, I think we're already getting there. There's still lots of improvement we can do, but I think our first challenge now is basically to start measuring what we're already doing, because lots of countries, lots of local companies, lots of multinational companies, lots of financial institutions are already asking our farmers, what are we doing in terms of ESGs.
Yeah, valid points about the economics as well. It's one thing to produce the food, protect the food, and then you need to afford the food as well, right? Good, from your side.
No, yeah, maybe just a point on, you mentioned glyphosate, and I shared it with Lisa. I see the media referred to glyphosate as organophosphate. So I think what I'm getting at is maybe communication is also a very important role in the whole process, and telling the right stories, and also maybe raising our voice if statements are being made, like putting products in the wrong groups. Then this back to sustainability, and an important part of sustainability obviously is the economy part of it. At the end of the day, everybody needs to make money, and it's probably not a sin to make money. It's important if you want to be sustainable. So then if your question was what are we doing around this, and I mentioned about crop rotation studies that we're doing as an industry. These, I think, are becoming very, very important. But I think the next step is also how do we test new concepts? Because up until now, I think we've had a very much a product-driven approach, where you've got product A and it should fit into a spray program at that stage. How do we integrate projects into systems and understand how they work? Because every area I think we need to understand is a potato farmer in Limpopo and a potato farmer in the Sunveld area is two different farms. So we need to see how can we tailor-make and test solutions in areas with good science. And maybe this is one thing I've realized over the last year. We've actually got some very good agricultural scientists in this country, particularly at the universities and the ARC. How can we use them? Because I think the things that we need to measure are, it's not in the old days where you spray let's say herbicide and you can see it works or it doesn't work. I think we need to start measuring much finer, and I mean, a plant is a very complicated thing. I think it's probably even more complicated than a human being. So there's I think a lot that we don't understand yet on how what should we measure and how do we measure this. And when it comes to new registrations, for example, maybe we need to relook at the way we do measure stuff and how they fit into programs in combination with various players in the industry. And maybe a last point, what was quite nice when I just prepared for this, I looked at all the big companies, and let's say the top 6 crop protection companies, they all got one word in their stuff. It's regenerative. It's right through all the companies, which is very good to see. I don't know really what that means. Was it just words, or does it mean a lot? I hope it means what it should mean. But the other important word that they use is we. We and regenerative. So I think it's what I get out of that is that it's not just about one person or one farmer. It's going to be a joint initiative to look at a lot of these problems in the way forward. So yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you. Some excellent additions there, Dirk. Thanks. Chris, from your side?
I think that the main focus from our side would be to how do you apply technology to have the best benefit where you apply it in a certain conditions, because there, as Dirk mentioned, there are huge geographical differences. So I think in that sense, it's very important to make sure that you make strides in small increments of efficiency improvement, and that does not necessarily mean yield per se. So I think in that sense, we try to focus on a few of things that we can apply there to make sure that you apply the things in the area where they really make a difference. As also mentioned previously, it's extremely difficult to measure. In our industry, climate still is the biggest factor. One cloud burst, or not even a cloudburst, but the wrong rain at the wrong time can actually destroy everything you planned for in the whole season. But I think that's important to keep addressing those small gains to make a difference. Maybe it's lucky or maybe it's unlucky in our industry. We can't push the boundaries too hard in terms of to repeat production, because the crop by itself will take you out of the market. So in that sense, we see it in the industry all over. We need to get much more involved in crop rotation to be able to be sustainable. So maybe that's the advantage of our crop, that it takes itself out of the industry if you are, regardless of what you're working with in terms of the environment. So that's all I have to say for now.
But keep the mic, please. Do you have any challenges, or can you highlight some of the challenges working towards these goals?
I think it's a continuous process, and because we are so small, to be able to be part of the community where we can discuss it and draw from the experience of other role players. So we can't function in isolation. So I think in that sense, it's probably the thing that we need to focus on going forward. We're definitely not big enough to make a difference in the agricultural world in general, but we are very focused, and we have very specific things that we do contribute to agriculture at large and to society.
Yes, it's with every small step that we get there, right? So, Dirk, from your side, challenges?
Yeah, I think one challenge is always affordability and the cost of production. We sit in a situation where we do live in a very volatile market. Potato prices change on a daily basis. And the farmers need to have affordable inputs. And it's quite interesting that if you look at crop protection inputs for potatoes is around about 14% of your total input. If you go back a few years, and I don't want to sound old here, but there was a stage where packaging was actually the most important input cost for a potato farmer. That has now changed to fertilizer and crop protection. So the farmers are really looking at things. So I think what needs to change is how do we use what we have smarter. I think what I'm seeing is we should really try and avoid these just-in-case applications. I know advisor has got a big risk on him, and if things go wrong, he gets a lot of flack. So he'll put something on just in case. And that is just another 500 rand a hectare. So we need to be careful of that, and I think that's where we need to be very clever on what we do, how we position stuff, and I think the know-how is going to be very important for agronomists to use, once again, good scientific evidence to help farmers being more efficient at what they're doing. So, yeah, I think That's probably the big things that I can see.
Thanks, Dirk.
So, Arisa, we spoke about the EU Green Deal today, but I think there's another lingering risk within that forum we are not discussing today, but I think that's probably also one of our biggest risks, and that's the CMR listed products, the 1A and 1B classifications. And Marnus, I think that would be a great follow-up study to see how those two lists compare, because if there's some additions or if the lists are similar, we should start talking about that and not only about the EU and what they are busy with, because the CMR related products is on our front stoop as well. Another one is the restricted products. Those products that is seemingly very dangerous to also use on a farm. So the directive is that those products may only be used with pest control operators or by pest control operators, and that could also cause a massive cost effect and an availability effect, because not many farmers or agrochemical companies have access to PCOs. Then I think another challenge, but it can be a positive, is we should start talking about the good stories in our respective industries. And I think the crop protection industry have very good stories to tell. It's like in the medicine industry. If it wasn't for medicine, people wouldn't be getting 100 years old now. And it's the same in crop protection. If it wasn't for the crop protection products, we wouldn't have the safe food we have. We wouldn't have food security. So there's many success stories we can tell in this industry, and I don't think we should be scared to tell them. Yeah, I think that's my story.
Thanks, Corné, and obviously I couldn't agree more. I also think you and Rillian, my colleague, need to have a chat afterwards regarding the CMOs and the restricted use products. There's lots to be done, and we obviously have quite a few challenges. So I think I'm going to wrap up because the discussions are starting, and this is how we need to sort of break up and then go and find solutions together, sometimes in smaller pockets. But to conclude, just your thoughts. We've heard about the localized African green transition, which is basically taking whatever the farm to fork strategy is and localizing it to say what makes sense for South Africa, or Africa in general. What are your thoughts on that? Where would you think we could even start? Is it feasible? Any comments on that concept? Welcome. Dirk, you have the mic. Would you like to start?
Maybe I can start. I think if it's something you can do yourself and own the process, yes, I think we can go for it, and I think we're already doing it, but we're not talking about it and we're not measuring. If we can start measure what we're already doing and pass it on to the next value chain member, and they can tell the same story, we will eventually get to a very good result when our produce get to the producer. But we need to start measuring what we're already doing. But then we need to own the process. If you get kind of forced into a situation that you need to do this or you must do this, like the feeling we get from the EU Green Deal, then it's a difficult situation. But if you have time and you know where to go and you can do it as an industry yourself, a self-regulatory type of a system, I think, yes, it's definitely something we should do. What we call it should also be our own, but we want to produce a safe and enough and affordable food for our country. And I mean, if that all aligns, then yes, would be my answer.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, that word affordable is such an important word, because what does it really mean? And to me, it's not necessarily just cheap. It's also things like quality, shelf life, and these type of things. And maybe just for those of you who don't know it, in the world of potatoes, 65% of our potatoes are consumed in the informal market. So that's the guy that, let's say, earns less than 30,000 Rand a month. And these people, I mean, it's important that they must eat, that this is our country. So I think that's an important point for me to consider. Then I think we actually also now in a situation where maybe this is an opportunity to build on. How do we take this forward? And it was interesting to sit with one of the retailers a while ago. Fortunately, they got a very small market share in our crop, where they want to follow these European principles of zero residue by 2030 is their target. So that's going to be tough. I don't know if that's maybe a discussion for another day. But that's maybe part of the story that we need to start telling is, what does it mean having zero residue? Is it good or bad? And these are questions that I have. So maybe to finish also with something Michelle Obama said is, she said, do we settle for the world as it is, or do we work towards the world as it should be? And I think that's what I'd like to see. I think we've got opportunities to do good. Maybe one or two of the products that are under pressure, maybe it's not too bad. I mean, that sounds nasty, but maybe there is alternatives. But one needs to measure each situation on its own. So I think, that's my side.
I think it's in everybody's interest to be sustainable, to have take a few steps back and have a look at the world and see how can we leave it a better place, but keeping in mind we still have to eat, and we in Africa specifically, we're in a growing population, which I don't think Europe have the challenges that we have in that sense. It's important to find the balance, and we have to make some adjustments in terms of how we view the world to be able to be sustainable in the next 30 or 50 years. So I think that's we don't have a choice. We'll have to adapt, but as Corna said, we have to own it, and we have to make sure that it is sustainable.
Okay, great.
Maybe just to quote something, you're probably going to speak to him tomorrow, Rico from the Wine Guys. We support their products quite a lot, but he said a valid thing. He said, as ons skrik, dan moet ons vorentoe skrik. And I think that's some good advice. So, yeah.
That's a great comment, and I love it. It's obviously very solutions focused, and so we're definitely heading in the right direction. We've been doing quite well, but improvement is always great. And I'm going to open now to the floor for any comments, any additions to what's already been said before we wrap up. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Theo from the University of Johannesburg. Just want to firstly say thank you. I'm very honored to be here as an academic, as an emerging researcher. It's very much an honor for me to be here. I would like to direct my comment, sort of question, to I think the gentleman from Potato SA. Yeah. You mentioned in one of your comments the whole thing about collaborating with universities. So that tickled my fancy because I'm a researcher. So I just want to know how intense is your collaboration with universities or researchers? We do quite a lot of research in trying to mitigate the challenges that you have spoken about throughout today. However, for emerging researchers such as myself, we kind of find it hard now to break through from our basic research into product development. Unlike my older colleagues, I'm not comfortable with just doing research for the sake of publishing, and I grow up, I die, all I have is million publications, but no product. So I just want to know how intense is your collaboration and what support is out there for emerging researchers who actually want to develop a product like myself. Thank you.
So, yeah, I think it's very important to work with all the universities. I don't know, how many we got? 18 universities in the country, I'm not sure. So the problem is, I think, together on collaborations. So unfortunately, we all have one problem, that is budget. and it was interesting to see that study done by Wandile and Prof. Jan Kirsten that we are spending much too little on research in this country. But there are ways to do that, and I think this is where collaboration should be there, so we can definitely have a discussion and see what plans there are. And I think what is important is that South Africa is actually still cheap for research, and maybe we should also start partnering with other parts of the world. Just to give an interesting stat, potato tuber mouse, which is a big problem for us, we did a project for about R1 million that gave us some very good solutions. We realized that the Australians did a similar project for $1 million Aussie dollars, which is about 12 million rand, with a similar solution. So it's maybe that's one of the asset or benefits that we do have here.
Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hold many hats, but I will say I'm representing the Embassy of Brazil at the moment, if my colleague already left. I'm also an advisor in South Africa. My name is Derian Echeverry. 3 questions, and for everybody in the room. One, South African farmers are facing different things. Different crops have limited access to pesticides because there are not a lot of registrations for that particular crop and the pests and diseases that they face. And the other one is because the companies don't find those crops big enough or market enough to register. So in a way, those products are available in the country, but not available for that crop or that problem for that farmer. So that's the first one. The second one is how big, I don't know if we are talking enough about it, but how big is the problem of illegal trade coming to South Africa in terms of other products, let's say pesticides? And the third one is how serious is South Africa in terms of talking about bioinputs, biosolutions, which is in a way supposed to be more accepted by the markets and the consumers because they don't have other problems like the chemical ones have. Thank you very much.
Should I start?
Go for it.
So I'll start with your last question. I think the bioproducts it's an important one because from what I understand, we can learn a lot from Brazil. So maybe you can help us there. I understand they've got some very interesting ways on regulating bioproducts. So I'm not an expert on regulatory, but maybe that is something we can learn from Brazil. And then the minor use crops, I don't know if potatoes is probably not quite a minor use crop, but I know a lot of our farmers do have vegetables, and that is a serious problem. I understand that companies don't want to invest in smaller crops, but I think it is going to become very important, particularly if you look at, let's talk about green manure crops, where you've got cocktails of different crops in one field. So I don't know how we're going to handle that one. That's maybe, I'm sure some of the colleagues on the floor might want to answer that one. And I can't remember what the first question was. Illegal trade, yeah, I'm sure there's people that can answer that. I know it is there, but I don't know the value. I'm sure that maybe someone on the floor, unless your name might know. But I know it does happen. These borders are very porous.
I'm going to actually perhaps put some of my colleagues on the spot here in case they want to comment. Rillian, Rod, do you want to comment on anything within those three? Rillian?
Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Love to.
I think in terms of the biologicals, our farmers do actually use biologicals, and our regulatory system is busy developing to register biologicals, because our guidelines were obviously written to accommodate agrochemicals. So we are partnered with SABU at the moment to look at various different guidelines to get clarity on exactly what information you need to submit to make it easier to develop these products and register it in South Africa. So I think we are definitely in that sense moving towards improvement and hopefully getting more products in the market that's of biological nature.
Thank you. Andrew?
Sorry, this is not going to be a question. It's more of a comment and something to think about, I think. So if we lose a whole lot of highly effective chemicals, does that mean the new chemicals that come onto the market we will accept as being less effective if they are, for example, greener? So up to now, my experience has been if you want to bring something to the market, it has to perform as well as the standard or better. Or we're now going to accept products that perhaps don't perform as well as the standard, or the standard has disappeared, so we now have a lower standard. That's the one question or comment. The other comment that I have is, it's all cool, but we have to have a regulatory system that actually works so that you can deliver all these new products. So it's wonderful to talk about. We're going to have these new products coming through, and bioproducts and new breeding techniques and what have you, but if the regulatory system leaves you a backlog of, I don't know what it is now, 3 years, 5 years, we're not going to make a lot of progress very quickly. So apologies for ending on that note, but thank you for allowing me to make the comments.
Yes, the elephant in the room. Valid comments, and it's very clear that we have a lot to do, but there's a will to do it. And I think that's the most important thing. So the conversations, the solutions, now it's putting heads down and getting to it, right? Any other comments before we wrap up? Now you're putting yourself on the spot.
No, I just want to reply to what Andrew said. So this morning, our colleagues from Europe informed us that they wait 12 years for registration, so 3 years isn't too bad. Just being positive.
Chris?
Corneille alluded to the challenges of the PCO requirements now. I'd like to hear from the other grower organizations if it's been communicated to their growers in the first place, and if they've got any kind of feedback on how they see this being implemented. We're picking up at farmer level that not a lot of farmers seem to know about the PCO requirement, and certainly they don't really have an idea about how they're going to implement it timeously and efficiently. Dirkie, Chris, could you maybe say if your growers are on board with it?
Yeah, I certainly hope there are, but I think we're very dependent on people like yourself also to support the growers and inform them on that. So definitely we need to work together on that one, Chris. And it was quite interesting recently. We had a bit of a meeting with Registrar Kone and myself, and that was actually a topic that came up very, very strongly, is how do we do it. And I do, from what I understand from him, and I'm not the expert here, but I get the idea that it is achievable. But we, as industry, in collaboration with the crop protection industry, we will definitely have to get some very good programs together, particularly for that actual operator, to get him approved. And I don't know exactly how far we are on those systems, but it's something that we'll have to do together. For sure, maybe a big takeout of this meeting.
Yeah, from our side, we don't communicate ourselves directly because we don't get involved in the chemical industry per se, but I think it's important that there are some sort of communication. And to come back to the regulatory part, I don't know it's going to accredit all those people that's needed to get the job done. There's simply no resources to be able to do that from my perspective.
Yeah. But is there maybe some comments from the floor on that one? Because I'm also a bit confused what exactly is needed. Lynn said she can help, because I understand it's not that difficult. But yeah, let's see what the floor says.
I do want to sort of slide in here with, we do have the regulatory forum that discusses all these issues, and the platforms are there, and these topics are being addressed. We just need to make sure everyone gets it. Chris, you would know about all the information. The moment it is available, we do share it. We mostly share it with the grower groups, to the growers directly. We rely on our partners to do that for us. So I think certain topics probably need to remain within certain forums, but those issues are being addressed by...
So one thing I can say for potato growers, they do respect the chemical agent tremendously. So I think that's an important point to make, and they do rely on them for a lot of information. So we mustn't underestimate that one.
Great. So CropLife members, take note. Nelly?
Yeah, sorry, I had two questions. Okay, let's carry on with the PCOs. So whilst we're here, I don't know, has the formal sort of a deadline, Rod, been communicated or received? By when are we expected to have that in place? Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah,
okay,
sorry,
so
Nadine, this isn't the regulatory forum.
Okay. Yeah, so we have started submitting, and it seems like quite an easy process. It looks like they're already sort of evaluating, so I'm sort of expecting. But on the other hand, I think from a company like ourselves and maybe Laufeld, we were also thinking that we would need to rely quite a bit onto the grower associations. Now that we've got, at this stage, there's already known 173 restricted remedies that have been approved. So I know that maybe does not include the entire list. So I think once that final list, I would think it's going to be communicated then by CropLife, I'm not sure, to the grower associations to help us to reach out to the farmers. Rather, I don't know if that's what you're hoping. So, so 173 is out there. So, apparently not a lot of farmers, apparently no farmers have come to light yet, but we from our side have submitted a few, and it seems like a very easy process to go through. I just had a question, if I may, for Margot. You touched on the derogations that were actually approved now in the EU. You had mentioned some countries, and you had mentioned some of the actives. Just for interest's sake, for how long have those derogations been granted? Was it per active for a specific use for a certain period, or was it a sort of a blanket 1 year, 2 years per country for those actives?
Thank you. So I would just need to confirm with my colleagues from Alexandra. You have the answer, maybe. Our European expert.
Thank you. The question was not to me, but I can try to shed some light since I'm based in that part of the world. So emergency authorizations are issued on a per annum basis and for a specific crop and for certain treatments in a specific crop. But then they can be renewed. There is actually a database that has been published by EFSA with all the emergency authorizations that are being approved, given by the EU member countries. And this database is continuously updated. And there is a process of reviewing by EFSA the basis for those emergency authorizations, the justifications given by the farmers, the way these justifications were taken into account by the authorities, and we're expecting, in certain cases that EFSA will provide some kind of judgment on the fact that if certain emergency authorizations are prolonged for several years in a row, if they are still justified or not, and so on.
Thank you. We are out of time, but there is time for one more question.
No, thanks. I'm Godfrey Radzelan from Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. I'm interested in the party of chemical registration. As the department, we have got a section which deals with the registration of the chemicals, which has been regulated by the Fertilizer, Farm Feeds, Seeds and Remedies Act. This is Act number 36 of 1947. So then the register in that section, the unit is a Directorate Input Control. So then it's not like when you register a chemical, there is a lot of factors to be considered. Remember, there is also environmental factors where maybe the chemical company must do a thorough research on that to check how it impacts the environment or other thing. Maybe if you want to register a chemical to kill, for example, false codil moth, if you apply then it kills maybe bees, then that chemical, it won't register. So then it takes long because we need a lot of data from the chemical companies to check, well, all factors has been in place. Then thereafter, if it qualifies, that's where the chemical can be registered, but there is no time frame because there is a lot of factors to be considered before registering that chemical. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And definitely the data is very important. We need to make sure these products are safe. With that, I am going to thank our panelists very much. Thank you for giving us an overview of what it's like on the ground for the growers. In light of all these discussions, usually it's very easy to talk about something over there, but actually doing it and implementing it, a whole different story. So thank you very much for your time and giving us your insight. I'm going to hand over to Rod, who will do the conclusion for us. Thank you.
So we've asked you all to be patient quite a lot this morning, so thank you for that. Another 2 minutes, and then we'll let you get out to the lunch, which is going to be served at the back. So just to summarize quickly this morning, it was great to have Jean here giving us inputs from an agricultural economist point of view. And a key thing that I took from Jean's presentation is he showed how the requirements for plant protection solutions in AVOs went through the roof in the areas where there are MACs next door, and the problem was MACs don't have sufficient products for use. So that for me was a big warning down the line, a good example of how less and less tools are going to cause trouble for us. We had a fantastic summary of the detailed presentation from BFAP on the subject they've done. We have got the report. Alriza said he has some light evening reading for me. It wasn't so light. There's a lot of detail in there, so we really appreciate the summaries that you provided. It is, however, scary to see some of the potential negative impacts on our farmers from the loss of having sufficient inputs. And as we said at the beginning this morning, we don't want to go and just complain to the European Union. We want to have some proof as to what the potential impacts can be for our farmers. So we're really very grateful for the information we've received, and it will get used. It was great for Margot to give us an update on the EU Green Deal, specifically the farm to fork. Yes, it stalled a bit, but as one of our colleagues in Brussels told us, that super tanker has set sail. So it might not sail at as this consistent speed all the time, but it's going to carry on going. So I don't think the EU Green Deal is dead. Remember, it encompasses many, many areas, not just agriculture. So it was a great update. Thank you, Margot. But we certainly can't sit back and think it's going to save us forever. Then the panel discussion was great. Sincere thanks to everybody there. And a key thing I took out of the panel discussion matches what we've been saying at our road shows this year. This industry needs to be compliant if we are going to have a sustainable industry going forward, and if society at large is going to put up with us. And I think we've said a lot of things there, and I believe we have the willingness from the South African agricultural industry that we do need to change. Andrew, you had a look at my notes, I think. So I don't think anybody in this room or in our industry wants to hang on to old chemistry just for old time's sake. We absolutely know we have to move with the times. And if you think a few years back, our members, very few of them were playing with biologicals. And you look at how many of our members are now playing in alternate plant protection solutions. The industry is not stuck in the past. We do get challenged. We do get activists telling us, well, the industry just wants to keep old products because look how fast, how hard they are trying to defend them and keep them on the market. We're doing that to ensure that the farmers still have got tools in their toolbox. Again, if it's been said before, if we had a regulatory system, we know the restrictions, we know the amount of data we have to put in, but if it could be faster and more streamlined, the efforts that was being put in by our industry to keep older products on the market would evaporate. There would be no need for us to fight so hard for these older products if we had effective new chemistry or new products. Let me not just rely on chemistry. We talk about any new solution. We're coming to the market at the concurrent time as losing older ones. So we need to try and get the activists and the naysayers off that bandwagon of saying we are just defending older products. As we said at the beginning, we want to start the conversation. We don't have all the answers. We're not going to solve all the challenges that the BFAP study is showing for some of our key farmers. So those of you who are in the industry, you know where to find us. Those of you in grower associations, those of you in academia, anybody who's got ideas and suggestions as to where this industry can go to mitigate the impact of the challenges we have with our international trade, we're all ears. We would love to hear from you. And I think we are basically on 1 o'clock, so we made up some time fantastically. Really appreciate you joining us today. Keep the conversation going. Have some lunch with us where you can start the conversations. And we really appreciate your support. Thank you.